You know the feeling. Something happens, a word, a slight, a betrayal, and suddenly there is a fire in your chest that was not there a second ago. The world narrows. Your thinking sharpens into a single point. Everything that was complicated a moment ago becomes simple. The person in front of you is wrong and you are right, and something must be done about it. Anger is one of the oldest human experiences. It has been with us since before language. And every tradition that has ever tried to understand the human mind has eventually been forced to sit down with it. Today we look at what three very different sources, a Roman philosopher writing 2000 years ago, the Buddhist tradition, and modern neuroscience each discovered about anger. Not what they disagree on, what they all agree on, because the agreement is striking, and it points to something about anger that most people never learn until they have already paid a very high price for it. Seneca wrote his essay on anger de ira around 50 AD. It is one of the most direct, unsparing pieces of philosophical writing ever produced. He did not write it for posterity. He wrote it because he struggled with anger himself. Seneca called anger a brief madness. His observation was clinical. In anger, a person loses the ability to reason. The face changes, the voice changes, the body shakes. A person who would never choose to act without thinking finds themselves acting without thinking. He wrote, "How much better to heal an injury than to avenge it." He was not arguing for passivity. He was arguing for something harder, the refusal to let someone else's behavior determine the quality of your own. Seneca's central insight on anger was this: the damage it does to the person who holds it is almost always greater than the damage it does to the person it is aimed at. You carry the fire. You are the one who burns. He recommended one practice above all others: delay. Do not act on anger in the moment it arrives. Wait. Not because the feeling is wrong, because the decision made in that moment is almost never the one you would make with a cooler mind. Marcus Aurelius, writing his private journals centuries after Seneca, returned to the same idea. Begin the morning by saying to thyself, "I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial." He was not rehearsing resentment. He was immunizing himself against surprise, against the flash of anger that comes when reality refuses to match expectations. Now cross 2000 years and a different tradition entirely. The Buddha described anger using one of the most precise images in the history of philosophy: picking up a hot coal to throw at someone. You are the one who gets burned first. Buddhism distinguishes between the first arrow and the second arrow. The first arrow is the thing that happens to you, the insult, the loss, the injustice. Pain is the first arrow. It lands. It is real. The second arrow is what you do with it. The rumination, the revenge fantasy, the rehearsal of everything you should have said, the construction of a whole narrative about what kind of person did this to you and why they were wrong. and what it means about you that they did. The Buddha was not asking you to pretend the first arrow did not land. He was asking you to notice the moment you pick up the second one yourself. Thich Nhat Hanh described anger as a screaming baby. When a baby cries, you do not argue with it or explain to it why it should stop. You pick it up, you hold it. Anger, he said, needs the same response, not suppression, not expression, but tender acknowledgement. He wrote, "Anger is like a storm rising up from the bottom of your consciousness. When you feel it coming, turn your attention to your breath. The storm will pass. You do not have to become the storm." Now arrive at neuroscience. In the 1990s, neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor made a discovery that has since changed how researchers think about emotional response. She found that the physiological experience of an emotion, including anger, lasts approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds. The flood of neurochemicals that produces the physical sensation of anger, the rush of adrenaline, the tightening in the chest. The sharpened focus takes 90 seconds to move through the bloodstream and dissipate. What happens after 90 seconds is a choice, not a feeling. The chemistry has passed. What keeps the anger alive beyond that point is thought, the mind, returning to the event, replaying it, adding to it, building a case from it. The neuroscience also tells us something Seneca intuited. Anger impairs decision-making. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, consequence, and long-term thinking, becomes partially bypassed during intense anger. You are, for that window, operating on a different system than the one you use for your best judgments. This is exactly what Seneca called a brief madness. He had no brain scanner, but he had decades of self-observation, and he described the same hijacking in the same terms. What does all of this mean? 3 sources: a Stoic philosopher, a Buddhist tradition, and modern neuroscience, each arrived at the same core insight from entirely different directions. First, anger is a physiological event that passes on its own. You do not have to act on it. The feeling is not a command. Second, the damage anger causes is mostly self-inflicted. The hot coal, the second arrow, the 90-second storm that you choose to extend for hours or days by continuing to think about it. Third, the practice is not to eliminate the feeling. It is to create a gap between the feeling and the response, a breath, a pause, a moment of not acting that slowly becomes the most powerful thing you do. Seneca called this the practice of delay. The Buddha called it the pause before the second arrow. Neuroscience calls it affect labeling, the act of naming an emotion, which research shows immediately reduces its intensity by engaging the prefrontal cortex. Naming what you feel changes your relationship to it. Not, I am angry, but I notice anger. The difference is not semantic. It is the difference between being the storm and watching it. None of this means anger is always wrong. Seneca did not say never be angry. He said, be angry only when necessary, proportionately and briefly. Marcus Aurelius fought wars. He knew what righteous response looked like. He still wrote against the habit of unchecked anger. The Buddhist tradition is similarly nuanced. Anger that protects someone vulnerable is not the same as anger that protects your ego. The tradition asks you to know which one you are carrying. What all three traditions reject is not the feeling itself. What they reject is the unexamined anger, the anger that arrives and simply takes over, that moves into your body like a tenant who was never asked to leave, that makes your decisions for you while you believe you are making them yourself. The Stoics called this living according to reason. The Buddhists called it mindfulness. The neuroscientists call it emotional regulation. The name does not matter. The practice is the same. Notice the fire before you throw the coal. The person you most need to protect from your anger is not the person in front of you. It is the person you are trying to become. Seneca said it plainly, I am not ashamed to confess my own imperfection. He was writing about anger. He was writing about himself. The essay is not a lecture. It is a man reasoning his way through his own worst impulses with the only tools he had: attention, honesty, and time. The Buddha did the same. Neuroscience is doing the same finding. With instruments, what contemplatives described through practice thousands of years ago. What they all found is this: you cannot choose not to feel anger, but you can choose what to do in the 90 seconds before you decide who you become next. That pause is not weakness. That pause is the whole practice. Seneca knew it. The Buddha knew it. The science now confirms it. The space between stimulus and response is where character lives. If this reached you when you needed it, subscribe. New videos every week on the ideas that help us understand ourselves from the philosophers, the traditions, and the science that all point at the same truth.